Good morning. Welcome. My name is Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I am so glad that you are here with us this morning. Amid all the noise in our lives, we take this moment to sit in silence, to give thanks for another year, to give thanks for all those in our lives who have brought us warmth and love, to give thanks for the very gift of life. We know we are on our pilgrimage here, but a brief moment in time. Let us open ourselves here, now, to the process of becoming more whole, of living more fully, of giving and forgiving more freely, of understanding more completely the meaning of our lives here on this earth. Let us worship together. This morning's reflection is by Judith Corliss. Spirit of life and love, in this season of beginning, some of us are hurried and harried. Some of us feel sorrowful and afraid. Some of us are not yet ready to step forward into the future. May we minister to one another with wisdom, meeting our friends with open ears, open eyes, and open hearts. In this season of beginning, some of us are celebrating triumphs and joys. Some of us feel whole and happy. Some of us are eager and excited, curious to see what happens next. Let us each, as we are able, take part in one another's happiness and enthusiasm. Quiet Spirit of life and love, bring us the grace to share wholly and faithfully in the lives of our friends and loved ones. Amen. I write this, and you will hear it at the start of a new year. I say new because that is how it has been parceled out in the proper number of days and weeks and months to make a year. One is over, one is beginning. For the next couple of weeks, we will all persist in writing the wrong year on our checks. Quickly, the new year will become simply this year, and the old year will become attached to all that's past. To me, New Year's Eve has always seemed a rather arbitrary festival, a grand excuse for a good party, a useful time for reflection, an occasion for resolutions to be made, or at least toyed with, for the future. I don't subscribe to the notion of time that the new year traditionally promotes, with the old geezer being shown the door as the young tyke in diapers makes her entrance. I think that time accumulates for each of us, and that the slate is never made blank. It's more like a mural that we keep adding panels to, bending around the corners of our lives. There are such things as New Years in all of our lives, but rarely do I think they begin and end according to the Roman calendar. They begin and end at times by choice and at times by chance, at rather arbitrary moments of transformation, perhaps in a moment of loss. Other times when we feel in control of our lives and make a decision to live differently. Maybe in that rare moment when we know we are in love, or when we begin a new job, have a baby, write a poem, change our mind, get sick, lose a friend, look in the mirror. You'll know the time. You'll know when your own new year has begun. When it happens, raise a toast throw confetti, wear a funny hat, blow on a noisemaker. It'll be time to mark, even if it's July, especially if it's July. Happy New Year, whenever. Happy New Year. Happy and healthy 2015 to you. I was thinking this week, 3 years ago at this time, I was secreted into Provincetown by your stealthy search committee and spent the weekend here getting to know the town and the church without your knowing it. I stayed with Kathleen and Alicia over at the Fairbanks Inn and toured the church when nobody was here. I loved the cold and echoing sanctuary, breathing with history and ancient dreams. I loved the wide floorboards of A.B. Hall and the black and white portraits hanging in the Rogers room. There was a snowstorm that weekend, and the whole town was covered in a soft quilt of freshly fallen snow. Everything was white and gray and quiet, like the town itself was in on the secrecy of the visit. That Sunday morning, I preached at a neutral pulpit in Brewster, and the search committee came to hear me, half at the early service, half at the late. They split up so that they too could be in secret. I preached on New Year's resolutions. It seemed appropriate for both the time of year and for what the search committee was doing, looking backward and forward at the same time, taking stock of who this congregation was at that moment, its strengths and challenges, much as each of us do at the beginning of a new year for ourselves, and dreaming collectively about possibilities, as we each do also. It's an exciting moment, standing on the threshold of a new beginning, a new year. When I preached about New Year's resolutions, I called it, as I am calling this morning's service, New Year's revolutions. Revolution, a turnaround. Because that's what we're really doing when we make a New Year's resolution. We're turning around. We're turning around something in our life. An attitude, a behavior, a mindset. Here are the top 10 revolutions that people attempt every year. Number 1, lose weight. Number 2, pay off debt. Number 3, spend more time with friends and family. Number 4, exercise and eat right. Number 5, get a better education or learn something new. Number 6, drink less alcohol. Number 7, quit smoking. Number 8, get a better job. Number 9, volunteer to help others. Number 10 is a little amorphous, but it boils down to something like number 10, become a better person. I particularly like that last one. This year, I found a poem by Philip Appelman called New Year's Resolution. I resolved to read more of his poetry this year, particularly because one of his collections is called Karma, Dharma, Pudding, and Pie. You know it has to be good with a title like that. But here it is, New Year's Resolution. Well, I did it again, bringing in that infant purity across the land, welcoming innocence with gin in New York, waiting up to help Chicago, Denver, LA, Fairbanks, Honolulu. And now the high school bands are alienating Dallas, and girls in gold and tangerine have lost all touch with Pasadena, and young men with muscles and missing teeth are dreaming of personal fouls. And it's all beginning again, just like those other Januaries in instant reply. But I've had enough of turning to look back, the old post-morteming of defeat. People I loved but didn't touch, friends I haven't seen for years, strangers who smiled but didn't speak, failures. No, I refuse to leave it at that, because somewhere off camera, January is coming like Venus, up from the murk of December, re-virginized, as innocent of loss as any dawn, resolved. This year, I'm going to break my losing streak. I'm going to stay alert, reach out, speak when not spoken to, read the minds of people in the streets. I'm going to practice every day, stay in training, and be moderate in all things but love. It's good, isn't it? Complete this line of poetry in your head. Resolved. This year, I'm going to Don't be discouraged when I tell you that the average success rate on a New Year's resolution is 10%. Here's what I told the search committee and the Brewster congregation on that snowy January morning. A New Year's resolution, like a revolution, is hard to pull off. More likely, change happens in this way. Time accumulates for each of us. The slate is never made blank, but we can add panels to the mural, bending around the corners of our lives. And sometimes around one of those corners is an event or experience or encounter that changes us. And I told these stories of change that I think I've already told you, but that are worth hearing again. The first comes from Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen's book, My Grandfather's Blessings, about a woman named Cindy. Dr. Remen says, Cindy's husband described her to me as crazy clean. Like her mother before her, her house was spotless. Every metal surface shone, every drawer was precisely organized. This despite the fact that she lived with 3 small children and a big bear of a husband. She had an unerring eye for the slightest disorder. One of her young daughters told me that her mom could spot a Cheerio on the kitchen floor from the next room and would not be satisfied until the offender had confessed and picked it up. Cancer changed all of that. Her chemotherapy made her so weak that she could barely get from her bed to the bathroom. She did not have the strength to cook, and the entire neighborhood had invaded her perfectly organized kitchen and fed her family. Kind hands, unfamiliar with the household rules, washed, folded, and put away laundry in all the wrong places. Her perfect walls were covered with a dozen pictures made by the classmates of her 3 children, each with a prayer for her recovery, each stuck on with a piece of Scotch tape. During the worst of it, her husband brought home a kitten who shed everywhere, but whose purring warmth comforted her through the dark hours of the night when she was so sick she could not sleep. Now, she says with a laugh, she would never want to be the way she was before she had cancer. I drove my family crazy. I even resented my guests because they disturbed the order of things, she said. I'd been that way for years. She'd been that way for years. Being neat and organized, being in control, it was in her bones. Being crazy clean was a habit of a lifetime. And yet, having survived cancer, it no longer seemed important. She had changed. The second story is about writer Frederick Buechner. Buechner had a painful childhood and young adulthood. His father committed suicide when he was 10, and it was he who found the body. Buechner experienced the atrocities of war as a soldier. As a young man, he found many ways to avoid this pain, to focus on what was good and beautiful in life, to embrace his own good fortune and ignore the sadness. Then one night when he was visiting his mother in New York and they were just about to sit down to eat, the telephone rang. It was for him, a friend he had taught with. His friend was so upset he could barely speak through his tears. The friend's mother and father and a pregnant sister had been in a car accident on the West Coast. He didn't know if they would survive. He was waiting at the airport for his flight. Could Buechner come and sit with him until his plane arrived? Buechner writes, "There are many people in this world, I would suspect they may even be the majority, who in the face of such a cry for help as that would have seen right away that humanly speaking there was no alternative but to say they would be at the airport as soon as a taxi would take them there. My instinct, on the other hand, was to be nothing so much as afraid. I was afraid of my friend's fear and of his tears. I was afraid of his faith that I could somehow be a comfort and help to him, afraid that I was not friend enough to be able to be." Dating perhaps from that November morning of my childhood when I opened the door on a tragic and terrifying world that I had no resources for dealing with. I was afraid of opening the door into his pain or anybody's pain. So although I knew as well as anybody that I had no choice but to say that I would come, what I said instead, heaven help me, was that I would come if I possibly could, but there were some things I had to take care of first, and would he phone me back in about 10 minutes? Buechner returned to the dinner table and told his mother about the phone call. Her reaction caught him off guard. "That was ridiculous," she said. "His friend was a grown man. He shouldn't act like a hysterical child. Why ruin a perfectly good evening that they had both been looking forward to?" Hearing his own thoughts coming from his mother's lips, he instantly heard how appalling they were. He says, "As much out of revulsion at myself as out of pity for my friend, I resolved that as soon as he called me again, I would tell him I would come immediately." But when Buechner's friend did call back, it was to say that he had calmed down and there was no need for him to come at all. And he didn't. Buechner writes, "It was the start of another kind of journey altogether, and I had a long way to go. My mother's apartment by candlelight was haven and home and shelter from everything in the world that seemed dangerous and a threat to my peace. And my friend's broken voice on the phone was a voice calling me out into that dangerous world, not simply for his sake, as I suddenly saw it, but also for my sake." Buechner went on to become a Presbyterian minister who sat with other people's pain rather than hiding from it. As a result of that phone call and the hard work he did after, Buechner changed dramatically the way he engaged the world. He changed a part of who he was, who he had always been since he was 10 years old. He chronicled his own story, including both the blessings and the pain, in his memoir, The Sacred Journey. These changes in Cindy and Frederick Buechner's lives did not happen on the first of the year. And they did not come about through experiences that any of us would wish upon them, or that either of them would ever want to go through again. But the challenge of the experiences succeeded in adding panels to their life murals that made the picture of who they were even more beautiful. That is how transformation happens in our lives. It can come quickly, but more often than not, it is slow. It can be joyful, but often it is painful. It can be witnessed by the people around us, but often it is an inward journey that is private and extremely personal. It's not something we would announce at a party on New Year's Day. But let me tell you why I still make New Year's resolutions. Regardless of whether our attention to them lasts throughout the year or just for a few days, okay, in some cases maybe only hours, what I find so captivating about New Year's resolutions is what we are saying just by making one. By making a resolution at the turn of the year, we are agreeing to a very radical idea. The idea that we can change. Maybe some of us will only go so far as to say that we can change our behaviors, but others are willing to make a much bigger claim that we can change parts of who we are. Yes, we can put the cookie down, which is harder than it sounds. But we can also put down that grudge that we've been holding for so long. We can put aside those judgments we've been making so easily. We can learn to put others ahead of ourselves, take risks. We can learn to accept love. I know I made fun of it earlier, but here's what we're really saying when we make New Year's resolutions. I can become a better person. And we can. Even if it seems impossible, even if we have held on to one idea of ourselves, one way of being, so tightly that it feels like the only way, there is always the possibility that we can change. There is always the possibility of a revolution. Resolved, this year, I'm going to Happy New Year, whenever.